When people form groups, they develop unique psychological characteristics that influence our society and daily life. The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, is a groundbreaking work in crowd psychology and remains a classic must-read in social psychology studies. Before this book, people's understanding of crowds was rather superficial and vague. The book's greatest achievement was that it provided the first clear definition of crowds and systematically analyzed their psychological characteristics. Following its publication, the study of crowd behavior gained increasing attention and eventually became a crucial direction in social psychology research. It's no exaggeration to say that all modern theories, schools of thought, and methodologies concerning crowd psychology and behavior can trace their roots back to this book. It proposed that when people share similar psychological demands, they can form crowds, and once individuals become part of a crowd, they exhibit characteristics such as decreased intelligence, increased impulsiveness, and heightened self-confidence. The leader of a crowd must be a person of strong will, someone who can make assertions and mobilize the crowd through repeated statements and emotional contagion. The author, Gustave Le Bon, was a French physician. The book was published in 1895, 122 years ago. Interestingly, while Le Bon was a medical doctor by profession, his personal passion was research, covering a broad range of fields including ethnology, sociology, social psychology, and natural sciences. The Crowd was actually a product of Le Bon's amateur research. Although French academic institutions didn't take him seriously at the time, Le Bon persisted in his research independently and produced these groundbreaking findings of significant importance. After its publication, The Crowd pioneered a new field of study, crowd psychology. The book contains many brilliant insights and foresight, sparkling with wisdom. While many have remained skeptical and critical of Le Bon, questioning his research rigor and suggesting he presented personal speculation as conclusions without proper academic proof, and some finding his view of crowds too pessimistic, it's interesting that many subsequent historical events have validated his conclusions about crowd psychology. Le Bon clearly pointed out that not just any large gathering of people constitutes a crowd. For example, people passing through or strolling in a square, though numerous, don't form a crowd. Only when these people develop a psychological unity, sharing the same psychological demands, do they form what we call a crowd. Though people may gather in the same place at the same time, they each have their own focus and don't share a unified psychological demand. In such cases, they don't constitute what Le Bon defines as a crowd. However, if an earthquake suddenly strikes and someone shouts, "Earthquake!" run to open ground, causing people to panic and flee, the situation changes instantly. At this moment, they become unified by the shared psychology of survival and self-preservation, taking action to protect themselves. This transforms them into what Le Bon defines as a crowd. Le Bon specifically points out that a crowd doesn't necessarily have to be physically gathered in one place. When psychological unity forms, people scattered throughout society, despite never meeting face-to-face or knowing each other, can still form a crowd and exhibit crowd-specific characteristics. Stock market investors serve as a perfect example. They come from all walks of life, spread throughout society, and most don't know each other. Yet because they share the common psychology of wanting to profit from stock trading, they constitute what Le Bon defines as a crowd. Although Le Bon doesn't explicitly state this in his book, it's worth noting that highly organized groups like military personnel, corporate employees, or students don't fall into this category. These highly structured groups follow specific rules, accept strict management, and act under clear command, lacking the crowd psychology characteristics Le Bon describes. This covers the first key point of the book: what exactly constitutes a Le Bon crowd. The second key point addresses the psychological characteristics of crowds in Le Bon's view, how people behave differently when they become part of a crowd. Le Bon identifies three psychological characteristics of crowds. The first is decreased intelligence. When individuals merge into a crowd, does their collective intelligence equal the sum of individual intelligences? Do they become smarter? Is the saying, "two heads are better than one," true? No. Le Bon argues the opposite. Crowd intelligence falls below the average individual intelligence level. When people gather, their collective thinking becomes irrational, simplified, and lacks common sense and logic. Le Bon provides several examples. Crowds readily accept simple calls to action, disregard evidence and reasoning, and avoid analysis and judgment. The simpler the proposition appealing to basic needs, the more likely crowds will support it. Due to this decreased intelligence, crowds are particularly susceptible to suggestion, believing and spreading absurd rumors, and accepting bizarre ideas. The second characteristic Le Bon identifies is overconfidence and boldness. As individuals, people might only dream of certain daring acts, sometimes not even daring to imagine them. However, when these individuals form a crowd, they not only dare to imagine anything, but also dare to act, sometimes feeling unstoppable. This psychological characteristic stems from two reasons. First, the crowd's strength in numbers can achieve what individuals alone cannot. When individual powers unite, people believe anything can be easily achieved. Secondly, when individuals merge into a group, their fear of punishment diminishes or disappears. In other words, they feel they don't need to take responsibility for their actions, so they disregard the law. Since actions are taken collectively, no one dares to punish or retaliate against such a large group. Even if someone does, the consequences are shared by the entire group, so individuals need not worry. The third psychological characteristic of crowds is their emotional nature and eagerness to act. Crowds form and develop through emotional contagion. They are always driven by emotions, with the most intense emotions likely to become the dominant force. Under increasingly intense emotions, crowds tend to take immediate action rather than just talk. Therefore, once people gather as a crowd, they become like a powder keg, easily ignited and explosive. Le Bon summarized these crowd psychological characteristics: decreased intelligence, increased confidence, and emotional urgency to act. He compared crowds to women, children, and savages, sarcastically suggesting they act not with their brains, but with their spinal cords. This was Le Bon's grave mistake, leading to accusations of racism and discrimination against women and children, drawing constant criticism and attacks. Le Bon's focus on crowds was largely influenced by his era. The French Revolution and Napoleon completely transformed France, causing dramatic social changes. The traditional feudal monarchy and religious authority lost their sacred status. The power of the masses erupted with tremendous force, and through repeated mass movements and street protests, public opinion became increasingly decisive in everything from political elections to fashion trends. Watching this rise of mass power, Le Bon was deeply concerned. He sensed that in future society, these crowds of ordinary people would play a dominant role. His focus on crowd psychology and behavior was aimed at predicting future social development. His findings about crowd characteristics, irrationality, impulsiveness, recklessness, led him to take a pessimistic view of the future. Le Bon believed crowd formation was influenced by indirect and direct factors. Indirect factors referred to the long-term infiltration of ideas and thoughts, gradually changing people's thinking over extended periods. His example was the French Revolution's incubation, where ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity spread throughout French society for over a century, preparing the ideological groundwork for the revolution. Direct factors were sudden events that triggered crowd emotions, what we commonly call the spark that ignites the powder keg. Once ignited, these emotions spread throughout society, causing various people to instantly share the same feelings. With this psychological unity, under the guidance of crowd leaders, masses quickly mobilize and take large-scale action. The storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution exemplifies such a trigger, instantly awakening revolutionary sentiment among the French people. The movement quickly evolved into a massive public uprising that overthrew the monarchy. All groups emerged under the long-term influence of indirect factors and the instant trigger of direct factors. Interestingly, groups were initially mobilized under a simple, clear slogan with seemingly well-defined goals. However, since these slogans lacked precise definition, the final outcomes often deviated significantly from the original intentions. While group actions aim for specific goals, the end results frequently veer off course. Take the French Revolution, for example. The masses overthrew the Bourbon monarchy demanding liberty and democracy, yet shortly after, these same people enthusiastically supported Napoleon's rise to emperor and his dictatorship. Another example is sports fans gathering to watch a game. hoping their favorite team wins. However, after the match, opposing fan groups clash and the situation degenerates into a brawl. The game's outcome becomes irrelevant, while the fan violence becomes the main topic of public discussion and fascination. Although Le Bon was critical and skeptical of the groups he studied, he objectively noted that group behavior cannot be simply judged as good or bad through moral standards. A mobilized group might engage in bloody conflicts over trivial matters one moment, then willingly sacrifice their lives to protect a child the next. Thus, we can understand that group characteristics aren't inherently good or bad. What matters is how the leader guides the group. Above, we discussed how groups emerge and develop through long-term indirect factors and immediate direct triggers. Now, let's explore the final key point, the fascinating phenomenon of group leadership. Le Bon identified two types of group leaders, temporary and permanent. Temporary leaders can guide groups in immediate actions, such as ringleaders in sports fan riots, civilian heroes coordinating disaster relief, or influential social media personalities shaping public opinion. These temporary leaders' main characteristic is their greater determination, fervor, and spirit of sacrifice when facing difficulties and emergencies. Their actions directly inspire group members to follow and imitate. Le Bon also noted that these temporary leaders share another trait. Once the immediate need for their leadership passes, they quickly lose their leadership aura and revert to ordinary individuals, often revealing various weaknesses. The sports riot ringleader, the civilian disaster coordinator, or the social media influencer might be unremarkable in their daily lives, perhaps even bullied by others. Similarly, charismatic celebrities may eventually be abandoned by fans, becoming ordinary performers. However, permanent group leaders are quite different. Though rare, their influence is enormous, sometimes continuing even after their death. Le Bon illustrates the concept of long-term leadership through Napoleon's story. Napoleon's heroic image in the hearts of the French people grew even more sacred after his death. This profound influence was so strong that it even helped his originally unknown and mediocre nephew ascend to the imperial throne. We can identify many such revered group leaders whose charisma has achieved almost religious-like effects. Le Bon believes that to become such a long-term mass leader, extraordinary willpower is an essential quality. These individuals maintain unwavering conviction in their beliefs over extended periods, facing any difficulties and dangers without changing their stance. They're not just persistent. They're the type who would keep pushing until they break through the wall. Their tenacious will is the key to their continued ability to maintain and lead groups. Regarding how leaders mobilize groups, Le Bon summarizes three key principles: assertion, repetition, and contagion. What does this mean? As a leader, one must present a proposition to their group in the form of an assertion, simple, direct, and clear, requiring no evidence or argument, appealing to the group's basic needs. Whether religious doctrine, political slogans, or marketing advertisements, anything that moves the target audience must be such an assertion. Mere assertion isn't enough to deeply influence people. The second principle is repetition, constant, consistent repetition in various situations. Important messages must be repeated 3 times. Le Bon believes that tireless repetition of assertions allows them to enter people's subconscious, making people believe in them unconsciously. When appropriate situations arise, people act immediately on these commands without needing further thought or analysis. For leaders to make more people accept their assertions, they need the third principle, emotional contagion. Leaders must use strong emotions to influence their immediate followers, who then spread these emotions to others. Through this emotional contagion, people with similar emotional responses are awakened to accept the leader's propositions. Even those who might not fully agree with the leader's assertions may eventually become followers if infected by these emotions. 2 emotions are particularly easy to exploit: fear and anger. These emotions are highly contagious, and when assertions are wrapped in such emotions and spread, infected groups will believe them unquestioningly and act according to the assertion's instructions. First, the definition of crowds. Le Bon specifically defines crowds not as any gathering of people, but as groups of people united by certain psychological demands, such as football hooligans in city centers or stock market investors. Second, 3 psychological characteristics of crowds. Le Bon believes that once individuals gather into crowds, they display very different psychological traits. One is reduced intelligence. The crowd's intellectual level is often below the average of its members. Another is overconfidence, fearless and bold. The third is being emotional, sensitive, and impulsive. Third, the formation and development of crowds. Crowds are influenced by both indirect and direct factors, with indirect factors building the ideological foundation over time. Under direct catalysts, crowds form rapidly. Group behavior is deeply influenced by each nation's historical culture. From a moral perspective, crowds themselves are neither right nor wrong. They only demonstrate preparatory guidance and immense power. Leaders play a unique role in crowds, guiding collective action. These leaders must possess exceptional willpower and authority bestowed by prestige, skillfully wielding their influence over group members. Their method of mobilizing crowds involves making assertive statements, repeatedly reinforcing them, and inspiring followers through intense emotional contagion. Many scholars point out that Le Bon's conclusions in this book are extreme and arbitrary, lacking both rigorous reasoning and reliable evidence. Perhaps because Le Bon was an amateur scholar, while he raised brilliant and pertinent questions, his analysis lacked standard scientific methodology, drawing criticism from academics. There's an interesting theory about this book. Some suggest Le Bon wrote it to test his own principles of crowd leadership, assertion, repetition, and contagion. Upon careful rereading, one can indeed notice the recurring assertive conclusions and emotional engagement throughout the text. Over a century later, despite continued criticism, this book remains a milestone in social psychology and one of the most widely read sociological works. In this way, Le Bon validated his own theories through the book's writing style. He succeeded. When reading such social science classics, it's important to understand that their validity is relative, not absolute. Unlike natural sciences where things are either right or wrong, social science theories offer analytical conclusions about human society based on specific premises. These classic works' greatest value lies in their innovation, either pioneering systematic studies of social phenomena or challenging previous theories with new perspectives. The focus should be on their innovative thinking rather than seeking absolute truths. Social science classics rarely provide specific practical guidelines. Instead, they offer perspectives, insights, and approaches that inspire us to think and examine social phenomena from multiple angles. Just as investors study Warren Buffett, shelves of books analyze his investment methods. However, the real lesson isn't his trading techniques, but his fundamental market philosophy. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. This exemplifies maintaining clear judgment amid chaos. Finally, approach these social science classics with critical thinking and selective acceptance. While they provide valuable perspectives for understanding social issues, we shouldn't become overly invested in any single theory or book. We should truly absorb what we read, allowing our own thoughts to emerge while connecting the theories from books with our life and work experiences. This approach makes reading dynamic and meaningful. After today's The Unbearable Lightness of Being, I will continue to explore and interpret a series of sociological masterpieces including Teaching Spirit, Obedience to Authority, The Lucifer Effect, The Spiral of Silence, and Escape from Freedom. These works share an intrinsic intellectual thread, helping us understand how deeply each individual is controlled and influenced by their social environment.